Riley took a deep breath as she sat down, her hands folded in front of her, her expression calm, but the emotions of that day still simmering just beneath the surface. She looked directly at the camera, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable edge. Let me start by saying this. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this. I never imagined that the people I trusted the most, the people who were supposed to be there for me, would abandon me when I needed them the most. But that's exactly what happened when I went into labor. Riley paused, her eyes hardening as she reflected on the memory. I was scared, tired, and vulnerable. It was my first time, and I was in a lot of pain. I thought it would be different. I thought I could count on my family. I thought I could count on my partner. But instead, I was left alone to struggle with it all. She shook her head slightly, her voice tightening. The day started out like any other. I felt the contractions, but it wasn't anything too extreme at first. But then things escalated quickly. The pain hit hard, and I knew something was wrong. I called my partner, told him I needed to go to the hospital. I was scared. I was terrified, but I thought, I'll be fine. We'll get through this together. Her eyes grew more intense as she continued. But when we got to the hospital, things took a turn. Instead of the support I expected, the nurses and the doctors were distant, rushed. My partner, instead of being the support I needed, just stood there, looking helpless. And then, when I asked for help, when I needed someone to hold my hand and reassure me, I was told to wait. Riley's lips pressed into a tight line, her voice now tinged with anger. Wait. That's what they told me. Just wait. And I did. But the pain kept getting worse. The contractions hit harder, and there I was, alone. It felt like I was fighting for my life, and they just kept telling me to wait. She let out a deep breath, her hands clenched tightly now. I begged for help. I begged for someone to do something. I asked for the epidural, anything to stop the pain. But they said I had to wait. They said I wasn't in active labor yet, that I wasn't far enough along for them to take me seriously. It felt like I was invisible. It felt like no one cared. Her eyes darkened, the memory of the abandonment still fresh in her mind. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when they finally decided it was time for the epidural. I was barely able to hold it together, barely able to breathe through the pain when they told me they couldn't give it to me because it was too late. They said I had waited too long. Riley's voice trembled with the intensity of the memory. Too late. I was in the worst pain of my life, and they told me it was too late. I felt so humiliated, so utterly betrayed. It was like they had just given up on me, like I wasn't worth the effort. She took a moment to compose herself, her eyes now fierce with the determination she hadn't felt that day. But here's where things changed. I wasn't going to let them just walk away from me like that. I wasn't going to let them dismiss my pain and my fear like I was nothing. So I decided to make them regret it. Riley's lips curled into a small but knowing smile. And trust me, they regretted it. Every second of it. Riley took a deep breath, her gaze steady and unyielding as she continued her story. The thing about being pushed to the edge when you're already feeling at your most vulnerable is that something inside you changes. You realize that you have a choice. You can either let them keep walking all over you, or you can stand up for yourself in a way that no one expects. She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. And that's exactly what I did. I knew I couldn't take the pain any longer, but I also knew I couldn't keep just sitting there, waiting for someone to help me. So I made a choice. I wasn't going to just lie there and let them make decisions for me. I wasn't going to let anyone dismiss my pain anymore. I wasn't going to let them think they could control me like that. Riley's hands gripped the edge of the chair, her eyes hardening with the intensity of the memory. I demanded that they take me seriously. I started speaking up more forcefully. I wasn't calm anymore. I wasn't polite. I told them, "You need to help me now." I wasn't asking anymore. I was telling them what needed to happen. I could see the surprise in their eyes. They didn't expect me to fight back. They thought I would just accept what they told me, that I would be the good patient. But I wasn't going to play that role anymore. Her voice grew louder as she relived the moment. And then, when I saw that they still weren't doing anything to help me, that's when I knew I had to escalate it. I started raising my voice. I started demanding. I wasn't just some difficult patient. I wasn't a number. I was a woman in the most excruciating pain of her life, and I had every right to be heard. Riley's face softened for a moment, but there was still a fire in her eyes. I guess part of me knew I was being a little dramatic, but at that point, I didn't care. They had already pushed me so far, and the more I felt ignored, the more that rage built inside me. I wasn't going to just sit there quietly and wait for them to make their decision. I was in labor, for God's sake. The least they could do was help me. She shook her head, a small, almost bitter laugh escaping her lips. But even after all of that, it wasn't until the nurses started leaving the room that something inside me really snapped. I had had enough. I called out for someone to stay, to help me, but they ignored me. And that's when it hit me. They weren't going to help me until I made them. Zoe's eyes were blazing now, the determination clear in her voice. I wasn't going to let them get away with treating me like this. I wasn't going to let them think they could keep ignoring me just because I was in pain. So I did something that shocked everyone. She leaned forward, her voice low but full of conviction. I started to make noise. I screamed, and I didn't just scream out of pain. I screamed loud enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. I screamed loud enough to let them know I wasn't just some patient in a bed. I was a person, and I deserved to be treated with respect. Riley's gaze grew intense as she recalled the chaos that followed. Within minutes, the room filled up with people. Nurses rushed in, doctors followed behind them. They all looked at me like I was crazy, but it didn't matter. I could see the fear in their eyes. I could see that they realized they had pushed me too far. They realized they couldn't ignore me anymore. I had become the voice of every woman who had been ignored, dismissed, and told to wait. She paused, letting the impact of what she had done sink in. And just like that, things changed. Suddenly, they were all over me, giving me the attention I had been begging for. They administered the pain relief I needed. They did what I had been asking them to do the whole time. But I wasn't grateful for it. No, I wasn't going to thank them for doing their job. They hadn't treated me like a person. They hadn't respected my needs until I forced them to. Riley's voice dropped to a whisper, a quiet strength echoing in her words. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was when I saw how my partner reacted to everything. He was standing there, not knowing what to do, looking completely overwhelmed. And that's when I realized something else. I wasn't just fighting for my rights anymore. I was fighting for my dignity. I wasn't going to let anyone, whether it was the hospital staff or anyone else, take that from me. I wasn't going to let anyone see me as weak or helpless. She sat back, the fire in her eyes dimming as she spoke the next words slowly, with a sense of finality. In the end, I wasn't just fighting for relief from pain. I was fighting for my voice. I was fighting to make sure that when people look at me, they see someone who won't be pushed around, someone who won't be ignored. I fought for myself, and I made sure they knew it. Riley's face softened with the weight of her final thoughts. And that was the moment that changed everything. That was when I took back control of my experience. Not just in labor, but in life. I wasn't going to be anyone's victim anymore, and if I had to make a scene, scream, or demand what I deserved, so be it. She let out a deep breath, her posture more relaxed, the tension finally ebbing away. That was the first time I realized just how strong I really was. And trust me, I made sure they regretted it. Forever. Riley sat back in her chair, the memories of that day swirling in her mind, but her expression was calm now, almost reflective. The anger that had once surged through her had transformed into a sense of empowerment, and she wanted to make sure her message was clear. When I finally got the help I needed, when they gave me the epidural, I could finally breathe. I could finally relax, even though I was still in labor. But what I didn't expect was the aftermath. The aftermath of taking control. I thought it would be over. I thought I could walk away and forget about the way I was treated. But that's not how it works. Not when you've been betrayed. She exhaled slowly, her voice steady but edged with a trace of bitterness. After everything that happened, I expected an apology. I expected them to at least acknowledge what they had done. But no one came to apologize. No one came to check on me. Instead, I was dismissed, as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just gone through the most painful experience of my life without any support. The staff just carried on, acting like everything was fine. And my partner? Well, he didn't know what to do. He just stood there, like he was in shock. I could see it in his eyes. He was completely unprepared for everything, and that made everything worse. Riley's jaw tightened as she continued. I tried to talk to him later, to explain how I felt, to tell him how much I needed him there. But the words just didn't come out right. I could tell he didn't understand. Maybe he couldn't. But the worst part? The worst part was that no one understood the emotional toll that day had taken on me. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the mental exhaustion, the feeling of being ignored, of not being seen, and I couldn't just let that slide. I wasn't going to walk away from that experience and pretend everything was fine. Her voice dropped lower, more serious now. I realized then that the moment I took control, I wasn't just taking control of my labor. I was taking control of my life. I was standing up for myself, demanding respect. And you know what? That felt powerful. It felt like I had done something for myself, something I had never done before. I had fought for what I deserved, even if no one else seemed to care. I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small again. And that lesson stayed with me. Riley shifted in her seat, her gaze now distant as she thought back to the moment when she first began to realize just how much strength she had in her. The aftermath was complicated. My partner, who I thought would be my support, didn't quite understand what had happened. But I realized that it wasn't about him. It wasn't about anyone else. It was about me learning to trust myself. Trust that I had the ability to stand up for what was right. Trust that I could demand respect and make sure my voice was heard. I didn't need anyone's permission to speak up. I didn't need anyone's approval to take care of myself. She looked directly at the camera again, her voice unwavering. And that's what changed everything. I realized that this wasn't just about labor. It wasn't just about being ignored in a hospital room. It was about realizing that I had the power to shape my experience no matter what. That no matter what anyone else did or didn't do, I had the power to control my own narrative. And that's the greatest lesson I learned from that day. Riley paused, as though letting that realization fully sink in before continuing. But it didn't stop there. After I gave birth, I made a decision that would shape the way I would approach everything in life moving forward. I wasn't going to keep people around who didn't support me, who didn't have my back when I needed them. I wasn't going to waste my time trying to explain myself to people who didn't respect me. I didn't need to keep putting myself in situations where I felt small, where I felt invisible. I was done with that. She leaned in, her eyes narrowing slightly. And it wasn't just about relationships. It was about my entire life. I started looking at every area of my life and asking myself, am I being treated the way I deserve? Am I standing up for myself? Am I letting people walk all over me? And you know what? The answer was often no. I had let people push me around for years, but that day, in that hospital room, I changed that. I made a promise to myself that I wasn't going to let anyone else dictate my worth. Riley smiled, the warmth in her expression unmistakable. That's when I realized that the moment I had been waiting for wasn't when they apologized. It wasn't when they recognized my pain. It was when I recognized my own worth. When I realized that I didn't need anyone else's validation to know that I was strong, that I was capable, and that I deserved respect. Her voice softened, the sincerity of her words clear. So I made sure they knew what they had done, not to get revenge, but to make sure they understood that their actions had consequences. I wasn't going to let them forget how they had treated me. I wasn't going to let them act like nothing had happened. And you know what? They won't forget it. They'll never forget how I took back control. Zoe leaned back in her chair, the finality in her voice palpable. And that's how I made sure they regretted it forever. Riley sat back, her gaze fixed on a distant memory, but there was no uncertainty in her eyes now. There was a calm sense of empowerment as she continued. I thought that after I took control, after I made sure they knew how I felt, everything would fall into place. But the truth is, when you stand up for yourself, when you start demanding respect, it doesn't always go the way you expect. People don't always react the way you hope they will. She sighed, running a hand through her hair as she gathered her thoughts. For a while, I didn't know what to expect from my partner. I didn't know where we stood, and that uncertainty was almost as painful as the labor itself. It felt like I was fighting for something deeper than just physical help in that moment. I was fighting for trust, for respect, and for a relationship that didn't make me feel invisible. I thought he would step up, that he would support me in the way I needed. But when the reality hit, I was left wondering if he would ever understand the depth of what I had gone through. Riley leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. I'll admit it, the first few days after the birth were tough. There was this tension that hung in the air. Even though I had spoken my truth, even though I had taken control of my labor and my life, I still had to deal with the fallout. My partner and I didn't talk about it right away. There were no apologies, no clear conversations about what had happened. It felt like he was still trying to process it, and in some ways, so was I. We were both lost in the mess of it all, and it became clear that this wasn't something that could be easily fixed with a sorry or a quick solution. Her voice softened, the raw honesty of the situation weighing heavily in her words. But what I came to realize was that I had already started something bigger than just that moment in the hospital room. It wasn't about getting an apology or receiving the validation I expected. It wasn't about getting others to recognize my pain. No, it was about me recognizing my own strength, my own ability to handle what came next. I had to make peace with the fact that not everyone was going to understand my journey, and not everyone was going to treat me the way I deserved. Riley exhaled slowly, a sense of resolve in her eyes. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for other people to give me what I needed. I couldn't rely on anyone else to fix things for me. I had to take full responsibility for my own well-being, my own happiness. And that meant making some tough decisions. It meant reevaluating my relationship, my boundaries, and my expectations. She shifted in her seat, her hands clenched together as she continued. For the first time, I looked at my partner and realized that I couldn't keep sacrificing my own peace just to keep things comfortable. I couldn't keep waiting for him to step up. I had already done that. And in doing so, I had taken control of my life. But now I needed to take control of how I allowed others to treat me. I wasn't going to let anyone dim my light anymore, not even someone I loved. If he couldn't meet me where I needed him, then I had to make a decision about what came next. And trust me, that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Riley looked directly into the camera now, her gaze unwavering. When you make decisions for yourself, when you finally choose to take control, it's not always easy. It's not always comfortable. It often means letting go of the things you thought you needed or the people you thought would be there for you. But the truth is, you can't keep living in fear of making others uncomfortable or of facing the unknown. If you keep doing that, you're going to lose yourself in the process. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not after everything I had already been through. Her expression softened slightly, but there was still a fire in her eyes. In the end, I had a conversation with my partner. It wasn't easy. There were tears, there were frustrations, but there was also an understanding that needed to happen. We talked about what had happened, about how I felt ignored and unsupported, and how that experience had changed me. It wasn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It was about making sure we both understood what I needed moving forward. But I also made it clear that I wasn't going to settle for anything less than respect, and that I wasn't going to accept being ignored or dismissed ever again. She smiled faintly, the strength of her words still resonating in the air. I realized that it wasn't just about my partner. It wasn't just about the hospital staff. It was about me. It was about making sure I was putting myself first, even when that meant challenging the people closest to me, even when it meant making the hard decision to prioritize my own needs. Riley looked down, the silence heavy for a moment before she spoke again, her voice full of conviction. And in the end, that was the lesson. I had already fought for my voice, for my dignity, and for my body. And now I was fighting for my future, one where I would never again allow anyone to take away my power, my peace, or my worth. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, and I was going to live on my own terms. She paused, a sense of finality in her words. That's when I realized, no matter what happens in life, no matter who tries to take away your strength, your power, or your voice, it's never too late to take control and make them regret underestimating you. I made sure they regretted it forever. Riley leaned back, her expression softened but still carrying the weight of the lessons she had learned. You know, looking back now, it's hard to believe I let myself get pushed around for so long. But I guess that's the thing with life. It doesn't always teach you the hard lessons until you're ready to learn them. And when I finally woke up, when I finally stood up for myself, everything changed. I didn't just change that day in the hospital room, I changed my entire life. And I haven't looked back since. She sighed deeply, her gaze softening as she reflected on her journey. That moment, when I screamed for help and took control, it was more than just about labor. It was about me realizing that I deserved better. I deserved to be heard. I wasn't just some quiet woman who needed to be taken care of. I was strong, I was capable, and I had a voice that mattered. And once I realized that, everything shifted. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid to speak my truth, to demand what was mine, and to stand up for myself. Riley paused, looking directly into the camera as if to speak directly to anyone watching who had been through a similar struggle. And I want to say this to anyone out there who's feeling overlooked, who's been dismissed, or who feels like they're not enough. You are enough. You have the power to take control of your life. You have the power to stand up and say, "This is who I am, and I will not be silenced." It doesn't matter what anyone else says. It doesn't matter who tries to undermine you. As long as you believe in yourself, no one can take that power from you. She smiled softly, the calmness in her voice making it clear how far she had come. I learned a lot from that experience, but the most important thing I learned was that I'm not waiting for anyone to validate me anymore. I'm not waiting for anyone to tell me I'm worth it. I know my worth, and no one is going to take that from me again. Her gaze sharpened slightly, as if the seriousness of her message needed to sink in. There's something else that I realized, too. Sometimes the people closest to you will disappoint you. Sometimes they will let you down when you need them the most. But that doesn't mean you should stop trusting people. It means you need to trust yourself more. When the people around you fail to show up, You need to show up for yourself. That's what I did that day in the hospital room. I showed up for myself. And when I did that, everything changed. Everything. Riley's smile grew a little wider, her confidence clear. And here's the truth. When you start standing up for yourself, when you start speaking your truth, people will either respect you or they won't. And the ones who don't, they don't belong in your life. Don't waste your time trying to prove your worth to them. Prove it to yourself. That's what matters. She exhaled, her body visibly relaxing as she concluded her story. That's why I'm sharing this with you now, because I want you to know that you can do the same. You can take control of your life, your voice, your future. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to wait for someone else's approval. You have everything inside you that you need to move forward. And trust me, when you do that, when you start standing up for yourself, everything else will fall into place. Riley looked directly into the camera one last time, her eyes steady and full of clarity. So, to anyone who's been through something similar, to anyone who feels like they've been left behind or pushed down, remember this: you are stronger than you think, and no one can take that from you. You have the power to rewrite your story, and you can make them regret ever thinking you were weak. It's time to rise, and it's time to take control. She smiled one last time, the peace in her expression undeniable. Thank you for watching my story. If you found strength in it, if it resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another chapter. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've stood up for yourself, how you've taken control of your life. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The journey is far from over. She paused for a moment, her smile growing a little wider, her eyes full of determination. Remember, you are enough, and you have the power to make them regret underestimating you. Never stop fighting for what you deserve,